Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So we're continuing our quest through our chapter 2 neuroscience. As I said, this is probably the most difficult chapter in the book. It's got the most sciencey stuff, but that's what kind of makes it my favorite. So in this section, chapter 2, section 2.2, we're going to be talking about the chemical messengers in the brain, so neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. So there's different kinds of neurotransmitters. The most prevalent in the body, so the highest amount is, and it was also the first one that was discovered, is called acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, which is symbolized by capital A, capital C, and then little h, so ACH. And it is found at the neuromuscular junction. So the neuromuscular junction is the place where the nerve meets the muscle, right? Sometimes I feel like scientists just try to make big fancy words to confuse like laypersons. But yeah, neuromuscular junction is just the place where the nerve meets the muscle. And acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter that is found at this location. So it's the one that's getting released into the synapse to travel, and so then you have acetylcholine receptors. Acetylcholine has function in our consciousness, so our kind of how awake we are, and it's also been linked to learning and memory. We know that individuals who have Alzheimer's disease have a loss of neurons that release acetylcholine. So that's kind of where the memory issues associated with Alzheimer's disease are prevalent, and they may be a result of this loss of acetylcholine functioning neurons. Acetylcholine also plays a significant role in the neural network of the hippocampus. So we will learn more about the hippocampus later, but basically the hippocampus is where new memories are processed. They're not stored. A lot of people think, oh, the hippocampus is where memories are stored. That is not true. It's where new memory formation is processed, and then memories are stored all over the cortex. Excuse me. Okay. So some other neurotransmitters, these three always remind me of like the 7 dwarfs, like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. I don't know, they just sound like dwarf names. Anyway, dopamine is involved in the reward system. It's also involved in movement, motivation, learning, and attention. Dopamine is, so when we talk about the reward system, our bodies, our brains actually reward us to do things that are good for us, right? So when dopamine is released, it tells our body, oh, that felt good, let's do it again. Dopamine is released when you eat chocolate. Dopamine is released when you have sugar, right? So your body is saying, ooh, eat sugar. And you're like, wait a minute, it's not good to eat too much sugar. Well, you have to think back of when these systems were kind of evolving. So think back when we were cave people, right? We needed to know what food was going to be the most nutritious to us. And so eating something that was high in sugar, like fruits, actually, we need sugar for energy. So our brains actually reward us for eating sugary substances. That's why it's so easy to eat ice cream, and it's not so easy to necessarily eat broccoli. Right? Your brain doesn't really reward you for eating broccoli, even though it's healthy and it's nutritious and good for you, and you should be eating broccoli, but ice cream is so much better. Dopamine is also released when we have sex. Okay, so again, your body is rewarding you because guess what? It feels good. And in order to perpetuate our species, we have to procreate, right? So even though maybe you're not thinking that a baby is going to come out of every sexual encounter, our brains are actually encouraging us to do things that are evolutionarily advantageous to our species. Okay, Parkinson's disease and schizophrenia are associated with disruptions in dopamine levels. So in Parkinson's disease, which Parkinson's, you know, is kind of a movement disorder, there's a movement portion that's connected, dopamine is low. In schizophrenia, there's too much dopamine. Something kind of more interesting about dopamine too is that when you do drugs, it releases dopamine. So even though it's not advantageous to do drugs, it becomes habitual because your body says, wow, that felt really good, do that again. Okay, so it's a little bit, drugs kind of play a trick on our neurotransmitter systems. We also have serotonin. Serotonin is involved in a variety of things, sleep, arousal, our mood, eating, and then pain perception. And so sometimes a lack of serotonin can be linked to depression and anxiety. A lot of people who take SSRIs, that's a serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor. That's the most commonly prescribed medication for depression. So basically what that does, that medication does, is at the point of the presynaptic terminal, instead of taking the serotonin back up into the presynaptic cell, it lets the serotonin sit in the synapse longer. And so it has more effect to impact those receptors. And so it actually kind of tricks your brain into thinking there's more serotonin. So like I said, low serotonin levels can lead to depression. And serotonin is really tricky because it's involved in so many different things. So that's why a lot of times any kind of serotonin medication, it may be linked to a lot of side effects, right? Because yes, I want to target the depression, but it's also influencing kind of my eating habits and my sleep is off, or my pain perception. So serotonin has really got its fingers in pretty much everything. Norepinephrine also plays a role in regulating our sleep, arousal, and mood. Norepinephrine is also very involved in the functioning of the endocrine system. So norepinephrine, you've probably heard of epinephrine, right? That kind of like wakes you up. So high levels of epinephrine kind of arouse you. And this is also involved in like our fight or flight. So high levels of epinephrine, it'll cause your heart rate to go up. You'll kind of get agitated. And so you have to be ready to either run or fight. GABA and glutamate. So these are our excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. So GABA is a gamma aminobutyric acid, shortened as GABA. This is the inhibitory neurotransmitter. So GABA is really there to kind of push the pause button. It helps regulate arousal, and it also pushes the pause on pain. Pain is actually a very positive thing. I know that sounds very masochist, but pain is actually a positive thing because it tells your body something's wrong, right? So if you got a big cut on your arm and it didn't hurt, you might just bleed out because you don't notice it. However, pain can be inhibitory. So let's say you're running through you're a cave woman and you're running and there's like some kind of predator is chasing you. You have a lion chasing you, trying to eat you. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, so I don't know if there was lions and cavemen or at the same time, but whatever. Imagine this predator's chasing you and you stub your toe. Now, if you have to deal with that pain right now, you're going to get eaten by the lion. So actually what GABA would do was push down that pain response, kind of inhibit the pain response until you're out of danger. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. A lot of times when you first get hurt, you don't really notice the pain. It comes later. That's a big function of GABA. We know that loss of GABA can result in having seizures, right? So overexcitation of the system, and drugs that treat GABA are often used for anxiety treatments. Glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's found at about half the synapses in the brain. However, too much glutamate, so if you have a lot of extracellular glutamate, it will just overexcite the system and it can cause cell death in the brain. Well, it's a scary stuff, huh? We have the endorphins. So the endorphins are pain and pleasure in the brain. They're neuromodulators. They also act as kind of those natural painkillers. Endorphins, ironically, are very similar in chemically shaped to the opiates. So they kind of just like dull the system. Endorphins are released during times of stress. They can also play a role in eating and pleasure. So it's just kind of like, people say, I don't ever experience this, but people who run, first of all, what are you running from? But a lot, if you're a runner, good for you. You're running and people say, oh, I get that runner's high. I'm like, okay. That's what they're talking about is the release of endorphins. So it's like certain activities, sometimes exercise can release endorphins, and it's a kind of a soothing. It's not like a drug high. Don't get that. Don't get it mixed. But it can kind of calm your body down. All right. So written reflection activity 2.2. So we learned that a lack of serotonin in the brain has been linked to certain psychological disorders like depression and anxiety. The drug MDMA, also known as Molly or ecstasy, initially causes an increase in serotonin activity in the brain. So try to figure out investigate the possibility that MDA could be used for a treatment for individuals with severe depression. Is that an alternative treatment? Are there potential advantages or disadvantages for using MDMA for the treatment of depression? So see if you can find information on that or think about it, and jot down your written reflections, which will be turned in all together for the whole chapter at the end in Canvas.